Poder fazer escolhas significa conquistar um dos maiores desejos da humanidade, a independência. E o Sebrae abre as portas para pessoas que escolheram a independência e transformaram sonhos em projetos de vida, que ajudam a gerar empregos, desenvolver a sua comunidade e a transmitir a cultura empreendedora no país. Um lugar onde todos têm liberdade para escolher, inclusive escolher empreender. Sebrae, a força do empreendedor brasileiro.
Chegando no planeta C56, temperatura extremamente alta, 0% de água. Planeta D564, sem rastro de terra, tempestade de pó de magnésio. A gente vive buscando em outros planetas o que não valorizamos no nosso. Por isso, o Mercado Livre criou uma nova seção, só com produtos sustentáveis. Porque comprar de forma consciente é cuidar do futuro. Mercado Livre, o melhor tá chegando.
A moda muda todos os dias, assim como nós. E já que é para se reinventar, por que não começar pelo seu estilo? Repensar a moda, a atitude, o planeta. Isso é Rê.
Chegamos a esse lindo painel, onde a gente vai receber, né, uma pessoa que eu acho que muitos de nós assim sempre ansiamos muito por ouvir, que é a Kate Fletcher. E esse painel ele tem uma importância, né, fundamental para nós, porque todos nós aqui trabalhamos, né, com moda ou gostamos de moda e vivemos assim muitas dúvidas, né, quando a gente pensa em moda sustentável, em sustentabilidade na moda. A gente está como se nós estivéssemos todos assim mergulhados num mar de incertezas. E por mais que a gente adote práticas e materiais importantes, né, e por mais que a gente conceba nossas ideologias acerca da sustentabilidade na moda, nós somos frequentemente confrontados, né, com a lógica do sistema. A lógica do sistema é uma lógica de crescimento, uma lógica que não respeita nenhum tipo de limite, né? Não respeita os limites do planeta, portanto, não respeita os limites, né, das espécies que moram nesse planeta, que aqui habitam, e nós somos uma delas. Então, portanto, a lógica do crescimento não respeita o ser humano. E nesse contexto, a gente vai se deparando e vai sendo confrontado com a ideia do consumo, né, com o overconsumo, com o hiperconsumo. E como trabalhamos com moda, nós sentimos que isso vira uma grande contradição e nós vivemos nos debatendo, né, nessas searas conceituais que, no fundo, falam ao nosso espírito, com o que eu estou trabalhando mesmo. E essa é a oportunidade que a gente tem de reconfigurar, né, esse confronto e trazer ele para a esfera do sim, nós temos esse problema e nós precisamos mudar paradigmas, né, ressignificar a moda em toda a sua amplitude enquanto um fenômeno e não apenas enquanto uma esfera do business, né? E todos nós aqui queremos, de certa forma, uma moda que faça florescer, né, as nossas relações conosco, com o planeta, com os outros. Todos nós queremos trabalhar dentro da esfera dos valores fundamentais, né, do que é bom, do que é limpo, do que é justo, do que é belo. E pensando, né, em aprofundar essa discussão, né, e pensando em aprofundar a ideia de uma moda que promova, né, uma integridade ecológica, com mais qualidade social, com mais justiça, a gente pensou, né, em trazer a Kate com o último trabalho dela, que é um trabalho que questiona, né, a lógica do crescimento, nessa lógica de um crescimento econômico sem fim, uma lógica de crescimento que a gente se pergunta, né? Crescimento do que exatamente? Para quem? Né? Quem paga o custo desse crescimento? Qual é o custo para o planeta desse crescimento? Afinal de contas, que crescimento é esse? Será que nós não estaríamos no momento de nos desenvolvermos ao invés de pensarmos em crescer? Será que o crescimento não podia ser sob uma outra lógica? E então, esse trabalho lindo da Matilda Tão e da Kate Fletcher traz, né, essa proposta de reconexão e essa proposta, acho que acima de tudo, essa profunda proposta de mudança de paradigma, né, onde o paradigma do crescimento, né, ele é uma lógica que, no fundo, é ilógica, né, de um crescimento, como se fosse um avião subindo, 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 que não vai pousar nunca, por uma lógica baseada na Terra, no planeta, onde a Terra vem primeiro, não os lucros, onde nós, seres humanos, e todos os outros não humanos, vêm primeiro, porque é isso que importa. Porque os custos dessa lógica de crescimento, né, ilimitada, nós já estamos vendo esses custos, e eles são muito altos. Então, é preciso que a gente mergulhe profundamente, né, nas nossas consciências, para a gente entender como que a gente faz a transição para a sustentabilidade, né, a partir de insights internos e a partir de mudanças de paradigmas. Isso, de certa forma, tem tantas conexões, né, conexões com os índios, conexões com a natureza, conexões com a espiritualidade, conexões com as nossas reais necessidades. Então, essa grande proposta, né, que no fundo é tão simples, né, é entender que primeiro vem o planeta, porque ele é a nossa casa, e a partir dos limites desse planeta, a gente vai entender os nossos limites. A partir desse insight, né, eu acho que a gente é capaz de lidar com esses questionamentos, né, que nos assolam, especialmente a nós que estamos num sul global, que somos um país produtivo, né, somos um país ainda com muitas mazelas sociais. Eu acho que está na hora da gente pensar sobre isso, né, para ver se mudando lá no interno, no profundo da gente, a gente consegue ter planos de ações mais importantes. Eu agora vou cumprimentar a Kate. Kate, I'm very, very happy to have you here. I think as a teacher, I think the words have a power, a very powerful skills we have to change, to communicate, and to change things, especially when we are talking about the change of paradigms, the change of logicals. So I think what you bring to us here, your words, your last work with Matilda Tam, and the proposal of a logical, earth logical, rather than an economic growth logical, it contributes to our spiritual regard, especially because it's very deep. It's a vision that it's not only in the sphere of actions and solutions, but also a vision that brings us to inside us about our really needs in this world. So I am very glad. I think your words and your speech will be very important for 1,000 of students and journalists and people, ordinary people who are just people who love fashion. And I really want to thank you for being here today. It's nice to see you again. And please make yourself comfortable, and the word is yours.
Thank you, Lillian. What a gorgeous beginning. I'm really delighted and honoured to be with you today. And I'm going to just give a short speech. I've got some slides, so if you just bear with me while I share my screen, and then we can continue the conversation.
Okay.
Perfect. So I'm going to just talk really briefly about some ideas linked to fashion within Earth's limits. So when we think about the Earth, I think it's really important that we start with the Earth, and we understand that this is our context. This is our beginning, and it's also our end. It's fragile, it's alone, and it's limited. It also has great bounty, but it also is a limited system. And almost every astronaut who views the Earth from space pretty much says the same thing. They say that if our planet, when you look at it from above, you see that it's like a beautiful oasis in the vastness of space. They say that there is no other world that we might possibly inhabit, and so therefore we really need to take care of this one. But I suppose we didn't need to expend rocket fuel to find that out, that care was what was needed. Much traditional wisdom has long, of course, recognized that care is at the center of our practices, including, of course, the indigenous wisdom held within Brazil, as an example, where people recognize the deep relationships and respect that calls for us when we live together with all species. So when we think about the Earth and its limits, one of the things that is frequently brought to mind is a piece of research that was done in 2008 by the Stockholm Resilience Centre. So this piece of work was called the Planetary Boundaries Model. And what it did is it put forward 9 different planetary processes which need to be maintained within specific limits in order to preserve ongoing life and for Earth to successfully be maintained going forward. What the Earth system process boundaries do is that they mark a safe space, a safe zone, if you like, for the planet. And they say what you can do and what you must not cross. Unfortunately, to date, 3 of these planetary boundaries have already been crossed, while others are in imminent danger. Actually, it's 4 planetary boundaries have been crossed. Others are in imminent danger of also being crossed. You probably are already familiar with these, but the first is rate of human interference in nitrogen cycle. So this is very much linked to the soil. The second, no surprises, climate change. And the third is concerned with the rate of biodiversity loss. Actually, it is just 3. Silly me. Just regarding this last one of the shocking things I think we realize when we look at the figures is that we see that all living systems on the Earth are now in decline. WWF International has conducted research that indicates that a balance is being shifted, and there's a rate of loss of mammals of more than 50% in my lifetime. This is a truly shocking realization, and there's a sense here that humans, people like us, fail somehow to see the connection of ecological systems like the ones I've just mentioned to daily life. Our lives are sort of insulated from natural processes. How many of us, for example, know what food is seasonal? How many of us notice which animals, which species, which trees are around us? There's a real sense that contemporary life is marked by a sense of separation or maybe disconnect from the natural systems upon which we depend. In February 2019, I mean, plainly this could have been any year recently at any time, but on one week in February 2019, there was a crazy polar vortex that crippled North America. This is an image from Chicago with where the rivers were freezing like this. And at the same time, there was an insane heat wave of more than 40 degrees in Australia. And this goes along with new realization maybe. So this is a recent report, for example, has outlined that the rate of extinction is 8 times faster in insects than that of mammals. And what they go on to say, and this begins to be really important because of course everybody knows the significant work that insects do in agriculture and creating food that humans end up eating, and also in production of things like cotton. But what they go on to say is that the total mass of insects on the earth is falling by 2.5% every single year. And then the best data we have suggests that insects as a whole might disappear within a century. Perhaps when we come to it, it's important to take a moment to think about what's causing these effects. And largely we see that the reasons, the motivations for these then subsequent effects are human-led. Most pervasively, it's linked to deforestation and to intensive agriculture. Maybe what this underscores is the way we live, the way we eat, the way we dress, all of it has to change. We need a fundamentally different relationship with nature. When you dig a little deeper into the soil of these sorts of relationships, what we see is that there's a sort of Euro-American modernism, a Western approach, a Western philosophy almost, that underpins the social and economic structures and systems that dominate the global north. And this has led to a situation in which nature is remote, distanced, and largely unknown, where humans somehow perceive themselves to be outside of and above ecology. We sort of trick ourselves. We think somehow that industry, including the fashion industry, supports us with goods and services, while we forget, of course, what supports the industry. There's assumptions, for example, like those in neoclassical economics, that considers the environment to be smaller and a subset of economic theory. Many environmental philosophers have said that the Western culture, the modernist outlook, is ecologically destructive, primarily because it's focused on humans. It puts humans at the center. And that this outlook is a framework for generating a sort of blindness. It fails to take account of other than human species. The everybody else just doesn't get a look in. It fails to acknowledge the dependency of humans on ecological systems for survival. And it tends to see nature as not essential. It's almost like it's just a backdrop to technological or industrial society. It's a place where you get materials from. It's a place where you dump waste. Anthropocentric culture also tends to see nature in terms of property, in terms of entitlement and superiority. It's a means to human ends. What we rarely do is see nature and animals as centers of individual striving or needs, doing the best they can in the conditions of their life. Instead, we have a view where we see it as a source of interchangeable and replaceable resources. We only tend to notice nature in ways that contribute to human interests. We don't see biodiversity as having value. It's only really valuable in what it enables us to do. But wildness isn't only associated with things that are not human. We, of course, are part of nature. And actually, our task within the fashion sector is to find a way to connect, to associate, to find multiple centers of striving and value outside of things that are important to humans. Care for the earth demands that we think and act differently, that we find ways to act so that we can grow our identities as ecological beings, so that we can find ways to talk about fashion and nature together. What we know is that nature is the enabler of the fashion system. It makes the fashion system run. It critically is also the limiting factor. It tells us how big, how much, where, and when. If you consider the bigger picture, for instance, and the effect that fashion materials have in terms of production and consumption on the metabolism of natural systems, this gives us a clue to what and how much we can produce and what the natural systems can absorb. Over the last 20 years or so, there have been loads and loads of green innovations, and many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with them. Things like, for example, organic movements, pushes towards recycling, upcycling, work on supply chains, the circular economy. And what we see when we look across all of these things is we see that many of these initiatives mimic natural system processes in order to try to be as sustainable as the natural systems they're based on. But these things tend to take as their starting points the idea that nature is a resource for humans just to take and do what they like with. And that somehow we, humans, can manage really complex, global, myriad natural system processes. These things tend to put humans in a position of superiority. They tend to suggest that we can engineer our way out of the problems that we're facing. Perhaps what they do is they reflect the paradigm and the systems where the problems themselves are generated from. They put humans at the top of a sort of pyramid and put everything else below. But actually what we need to do is to make a shift to a new type of relationship where humans are a part of, along with everything else, a complex and set of relationships between all beings. One of the things that we see when we look at things like recycling and the circular economy and these other strategies is that we see very rarely that they're concerned with or focused on limits, that they sort of think that you can keep going forever. But that's what we realize we cannot do. Back to the planetary boundaries model again, because the planetary boundaries model shows us that we have to operate within a finite, safe space for humanity. We have to find a way to reduce the scale of the activity that we're engaging with and to engage in some of the very difficult, very uncomfortable questions that brings for workers, for access to materials and goods. But otherwise, we risk jeopardizing the whole planet. In the planetary boundaries model, I think that there's a real message of hope and agency. It shows us the way, tells us what we need to do. So as we go forward, what do we need to do? We have to try to cultivate or adopt practices of caring that go beyond the home group. And here, the home group, I suppose I mean people, humans, but it's actually more than that. It's like generally a narrow group of humans, generally consumers. There's loads of people out there who probably do need clothes in different ways. How can we cultivate a more plural approach to fashion that includes multiple different perspectives and is made so much more resilient and beautiful because of it? Can we create a fashion system that enhances our understanding of what it feels like in our bodies to be really embedded in nature? And with that, a sense of limits come because you suddenly realize that your part in this system is reliant on all of this sense of boundedness and finiteness and your role within that. Can we, and this is where I'm going to close, can we find ways to reinforce our experience of nature as the context for all that we do in fashion, for all fashion provision and expression? Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Lillian, you're muted.
Thank you, Kate. What a beautiful presentation, and what such an important issues you bring to us. And as I said in the beginning, it's a little bit spiritual because it talks about reconnection. It talks about a different place, to go to a different place. I used to say that a point of view is nothing else than a view of a point. We have to change the point of views. And we have to really think about earth first, nature first, because we are part of it. Though we don't think like that. So we have to change the way of thinking. We have to change the paradigms. So I have some questions to you. This question was concerned to the Earth's logical. And you talked about the Earth's logical right now. So I've been thinking a lot about values, because values can change our relations with the others, with the planet, with nature, with other species, and with fashions. In the Earth Logical, you talk about some values that I think it's very important, it's very precious to us. In order of changing the paradigm of growing logical to Earth Logical, you show us these 8 values: multiple centers, interdependence, diverse ways of knowing, co-creations, action of research, grounded imagination. I think this is great, grounded imagination, care of word, and care of self, care as a keyword. Can you talk a little about this?
I'd be honored to, yeah. Before I do, just to say, that is a magical moment when you said a point of view is nothing more than a view of a point.
Yeah.
So it's made my head like sparkle. Thank you.
So simple.
Yeah. And actually it's so apt, so true. There's so much truth and also power. It feels like, I could just change the point that, yeah. Okay. So Earth logic. Actually, Earth logic was embodied within the presentation I gave, but I didn't explicitly talk about this piece of work that you're asking about now, which is very tied to what I just spoke about. In a way, what I mentioned just now was an expression of this way of being, putting Earth first. But Earth logic specifically is a piece of work that I made together with my longtime collaborator and friend, Matilda Tam. So it's free to download for those who would like a copy or to look at it. It's at earthlogic.info. And it's a short report that is a radical invitation to the industry, the fashion industry, to the media, to governance, to citizens, to designers, to people who are listening now, to transform the fashion sector by putting Earth first. And as you've sort of outlined, the key sort of simple beginning, and it's a very simple way, is we say the thing that's limiting change in the fashion sector, the single biggest thing, is an obsession with the logic of economic growth. Yeah. And so we're like, okay, so if this is the thing that's stopping us, we need to shift and twist. We need to change our point that we're looking at. Mm-hmm. And we need to place a different focus there. And so we've shifted, pivoted from growth logic to Earth logic. And then what happens within this book that we've made, or this report, is that we unfold what that might be like from lots of different perspectives. But when you ask about values specifically, what we did is we started with values. And this seems to be, for me, the most essential thing for people to realize, is because values are extraordinarily powerful at affecting change. People think that the way to affect change maybe is to give people a financial incentive. You know, a bit of money will make people shift their behavior. Yeah. But actually what we see is that the thing that shifts people's behavior is values. People tend to act in ways that are aligned to their values, and it's a very deep, instinctive way that people behave. So we brought together this suite of values, and you're right when you sort of talk about them as spiritual. They're values that express the quality of relationships. They're values that you feel in your body as much as know in your mind. They give a flavor and a set of important priorities to what then goes. And we were really sure that what we needed to do was to move forward into the future with a much bigger eye on plurality. And so, for example, stuff around multiple centres and interdependency comes through. Care is a really critical aspect of that, and recognising that as we move forward, the way that we think about and hold relationships with other people needs to transform. And so it's not just what we know, it's also how we go about acting in this journey. And then others, including grounded imagination, feel like it's this thing, it's a bit like a yoga pose almost, where you both ground and also lift at the same time. So you hold yourself in a deep relationship with your situation, and you also think otherwise. It's not about fantasy. It's not about saying, oh yeah, we can imagine anything, because actually anything isn't what we need. We need stuff that is really going to make a difference.
Yes, I think that grounded imagination can free us from the idea of a collapsed future. We have, there's a movement that calls Free the Future, and one of its value is imagination. But you bring the word with the other word, grounded imagination, because really grounded imagination can free us from a conception of a collapsed future. Because all the time we think about future and say, it's all done. I have nothing to do because it's collapsed. No, it isn't. We have to think about it with more creativity, with more connections. So one word for me is very important: less. The term less. In the beginning of my speech in Portuguese, in the beginning, I talk about the conflicts we are submerged. We are very vulnerable, and we who work with fashion always deal with the conflict with the word consumption. So we have a lot of good practices: upcycling, circular economy, circular design, emotional design. We have a lot of good practices, but mostly we see them inside a business model. And these business models, they are all inside a paradigm of growth, economic growth. So I know a lot of people who are very sad about that. And we have to talk about less. We have to talk about changing. And I understand that's a very, there's a very much of rejection of this concept of less in modern societies. And this term have a really very deep impact in our ways of seeing things. In fact, less is a larger provocation associated transition to a sustainable way of living and doing things. To change paradigms from the economic growth to another logical based on Earth and the planets, we need to understand that less, what less means. So can I ask you what less means to you?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a good question. It's one of the things that we realize is that this isn't pain-free. This work that we're engaging with, it's unlike maybe going shopping or sort of stuff, which is sort of seen as like a treat sometimes, or, you know, it's something that you do when you're in your leisure time. This work that we're dealing with comes at a cost. There's frustration, there's anger, there's rejection and disappointment. There's a lot of strong feelings that come with it. Less itself probably has a bad reputation because it's not always, sometimes it's associated with really positive outcomes. Like think, for example, within religious communities that maybe on the run up to Easter, for instance, people within Lent frequently give things up, and they do it willingly, and they do it as part of a process of spiritual growth or aligning themselves with things that are different. So there are lots of examples of shifting in terms of less to other things. Less to me is less material resource throughput, but it doesn't mean less fun necessarily. It doesn't mean less fashion. It doesn't necessarily flow, because what we're talking here when we speak about less is we're talking about a material reduction, a demand reduction in the throughput of materials. And what we need to do is to create a sort of a leap, a mental jump to realize that the connection that got that fashion doesn't just mean material throughput, that you can find a way to keep on expressing yourself through what you wear and thinking about bodies and identity and sense of self and all of the other things that fashion is really importantly connected to creativity, to all of these things. You can find a way to do that. I do say also when I think about and talk about less that it isn't easy. As an anecdote, I'll tell you that I went with my family. I've got 2 teenage boys, and we went as a family. We went sea kayaking for 2 weeks, and we could take one small bag of clothes each, and that's all we could take. Books, clothes, everything we needed. So we had 2 tiny tents and very, very limited food. Only for 2 weeks. I mean, it wasn't any longer than that. And by the end of it, we were so hungry. We became obsessed about gathering water. and also, you begin to ask all these questions about what's important. And then I really found that living with this constriction of less, it was fine for a bit, then it got really difficult. And then we came to the other side, and there was a sort of a changed dynamic with the stuff that we had. Yeah. We were at the end of it, we were really happy to have a large meal. Everybody became really thin very quickly. And one of the things that I think is that we begin to understand is that it really impacts you in different ways. And I don't think it was only just because of calories. It was because suddenly we were on the back foot. We were struggling to be sort of confident and happy because we were uncomfortable in these little tents on the edge of windy rocks.
That's nice. Yes.
It's like, I'm not saying that it's not a dreamy future, but it's really possible.
Yes.
And actually, one of the things that begins to be really seen is that you begin to see that you have agency, you have power within your own body that can be really channeled, and this is where the change can come from.
We have agency. I believe that too. And you talk about the use, the craft of use. I think it's very interesting. I think it has a line with the last words you talk. Sorry about my English. I think the relation we have with clothes and shoes and bags and everything are relational. It have been always relation since we were before capitalism, before business. And using clothes, it's not depending of consumption and production. The use of things are in another level, and it's an act, no? To use something. You use it, and it can be almost political. The use. So we say fashion is a political way of expression, yes, but the use of the things all around us. How, Kate, how you see the use associate with care? I'm making this question because I know there's a lot of people who never read about in your books. And I'd like you to say talk a little bit about the use of things in fashion.
Yeah, of course. I'd be happy to explain a little about what I have come to understand. So in 2008, so gosh, 12 years ago, I started a small project which wanted to ask the question about what if, it's a what if question, okay? So it's what if we gave as much attention to using things, to maintaining them, to keeping them alive and going, what if we paid as much attention to that as we do to creating them and then buying them and all of the other stuff? And if you do that, what happens? And so I started out by thinking, okay, so I'm going to ask people all near where I live and in other places, how do you use your clothing? And it began this incredible journey, which I realized very quickly was taking us into this space, because a space that is hard to access really, which is, as you just said, because using things is not linked to producing and consuming more. So it's not necessarily linked to an increase in consumption. Using things repeatedly, ongoing, keeping them alive, can actually lead to a reduction of things. It can lead to less. And so it begins to open up a space where you see that actually the tools for this future, as we were talking about before, are within us, within the skills that we have. They're about the practical things we can do, fixing things sometimes, keeping things alive, but also more than that, it's the approach, the way that you're looking at things and appreciating things. It's valuing, it's a sense of awareness, and then it becomes broader than that. It's a set of noticing almost the things that you've got and elements of it, so that you begin to hold an interest in what you have. And so that then makes you want what you've already got and nothing new. You just are sort of satisfied with what you already have. And these same attributes that come when you take care of things are very closely linked to a sense of satisfaction that's similar or sometimes higher than we get when we go shopping for new things. So many of the supposed benefits of shopping for new clothes, actually you can get just by attending to, by caring for the things that you already have. And it becomes an extraordinary moment where you see that you can become a sort of actor in this space simply by really engaging with your existing wardrobe. And this shifts the power, because I'm sure everybody who's listening to this is aware that, you know, what within systems like fashion, some people have lots of power and most of us have like no power at all. And most of the power is centered in a very small selection of industry and a few sort of, you know, glamorous designer label names. But actually recognizing that we can affect the future, we can change what happens to things by acting differently ourselves, that then puts power in our hands. We don't give it away anymore, we hold it. Yeah. And this is this is like a mass rebellion that we can start. And it's not that, I should absolutely say, it's not that using things never uses any resources. It does. It uses some resources.
No, it's not that.
You have to buy something in the first place if you need to buy clothes, and to launder things and to fix. You know, it's not like there's no resources involved, but it's a different starting point. It's a different point of departure when you think about use compared to thinking about consumption. It's not aligned to growth logic. It's not aligned to a balance sheet. It's aligned to satisfaction. It's aligned to friendship and relationships between people. It's aligned to community sharing. It's aligned to, so it becomes to be like a really different.
Yeah, it's very powerful. It's really powerful. I have one last question. It's not an easy question, but I have to do it. I have to ask you about that. This is one question that I so frequently ask myself when I think about countries, global South countries. We are here, our point of view from the South. And when you think about less production, I think about low-income people who works on fashion industry and textile industry. And sometimes when I think less production can mean less job, or no, forget, can mean unemployment. And unemployment can mean death, misery, poverty. Mm-hmm. And I really think that we are passing through a changing. And I believe in this changing. And this change will be very hard for a lot of people. Hard times. How do you see this change? How do you see this time frame for these people who are my people, who are our people, because we are everyone one people, but those low-income people and Global South, how do you see they can face it inside the transition?
It's a very difficult question. Yeah. I don't have an answer. I have a lot of different sort of collections of thoughts, and some of them are sitting in contradiction with each other. There's obviously a huge concern about employment, about livelihoods, about, as you rightly say, about poverty, destitution, death. It's because we realise that garments are frequently made by people in really poor, stricken circumstances. And I don't think anybody who's working in this space proceeds without thinking about it. So it's very difficult to have that conversation. And yet I think it's really important that we do, because otherwise it's a sort of a false discussion otherwise. So for example, the head of H&M said that fast fashion needed to carry on because otherwise it would affect the livelihoods of the workers in Bangladesh. But what he was doing by saying that is he was splitting apart social questions from environmental questions, because the moment that you say that, you see that Bangladesh, a very low-lying country, is going to be underwater and climate change issues are dealt with. So what we see is that these issues are intersectional. They are at the crossing point of culture, of society, questions of economic questions, of questions about the environment. And we need to, as we proceed with these, thinking about limits and how much is enough, these sorts of questions, we also need to hold the social questions and the other things together. What we do know is that the reduction that we're talking about is specifically being targeted at the global north. And so this is because these extraordinarily high consuming nations need to begin to take responsibility for the impacts of the things that they're doing and affect a change. I understand that supply chains also are global. So this is to say that means that there's impact elsewhere. But there are lots of business models where people are looking to see how can employment carry on with work which is better paid and more stable. And there are lots of other models like around fair trade, for example, that have been worked and shown to be extremely high functioning in lots of situations. There's also new discussions that are happening between countries of the global south, which could become supplier countries to each other.
Yes.
So that whilst the north is necessarily going through a period of soul searching and reappraising, that we need to, the global south can also thrive and develop better, more resilient jobs and communities. What we're talking about and seriously realizing in the global north through the COVID pandemic, for instance,
Yes.
is that our economies, they do not function when we only make what we need to survive. So when we make things like food and health and provide other things that we need to stay alive and to stay healthy, our economy has been designed so badly that it just drops like a stone. So we need to move towards a reappraisal of huge global economic models. And when we do, what we begin to see is that they can be designed around life and thriving, not necessarily based on throughput, increasing throughput. Plainly, all this is a long-term project. It's a project that's one season's worth or 2 seasons worth. It's bigger than that. But what we see now is that there's a really big swell of voices that are building towards this recognition. I mean, maybe what COVID has done, maybe more than anything else, is it's revealed the hidden structures and the inequalities in our global system more than ever. It's shown nothing is hidden anymore. We fully know how corrupt and damaged the fashion supply chain is, and there's no hiding from it now. So maybe this is a good moment. It's not a good moment for livelihoods and for health, but it's a good moment to say enough of that. We now need to redesign.
Yes.
So I don't pretend to be able to find my way through this, because it's a really tangled, like, deep forest of stuff. But we need to extend ourselves into that space, and we need to invite as many others in with us as we figure it out. Yeah, will you join me?
Yes. Thank you. Really, this is a question I have no answer to. I think about it. I think about the return of traditional practice and the return to craft skills and different products and another kind of values. I think things are going to change, and grounded imagination will be very important to us to understand the changes and to find solutions step by step. Nothing is perfect. We are not here to pretend to be perfect. We don't have all the answers, and we are completely open to contribute and to receive, feed, to nourish our hope. So, Kate, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your participation. We're still together. We are together. We are courageous, resilience, okay? And we have to still together. So people, I'm going to talk in Portuguese now, because I'm going to talk about your workshop at Sunday. I will be there. Thank you. And pessoas que estão nos ouvindo no domingo, dia 22 de novembro, de 2h às 5, a Kate e a Matilda vão dar um workshop. O link vai ser divulgado pelo Brasil Eco Fashion Week. E todos, por estarmos aqui juntos, que essas palavras, né? I'm going to talk in English now, because I would like you to understand. I hope that the subjects we discussed here, although we have know all the answers, and the themes that Kate bring to us make us think deeply, think outside the bubble of growth, economic growth. I think we have to reconnect to essentials, the meanings and needs we have. I don't mean to be just food and dress. No. The desire is an essential need we have. The beauty is an essential need. The need of equity, fraternity, and a better word. To get out of this bubble of vulnerability we have to think, to research, to act. So thank you, Kate.